The Gypsy Joker Motorcycle Club, or GJMC, is a one-percenter outlaw motorcycle club that started back in the 1950s in California, building its reputation on riding year-round, partying hard, and living the outlaw biker lifestyle. Over the years, the club spread north, setting up chapters across the Pacific Northwest, including one in Portland, Oregon. The GJMC has a national structure with a president, a secretary, and a treasurer. For years, the national president is Kenneth House, known by his road name, The Wiz. Under that national level, you've got local chapters. The Portland chapter has its own president, vice president, treasurer, and sergeant-at-arms. The man running the Portland, Oregon chapter is Mark Dinklau, a motorcycle mechanic who joined the Portland chapter in the early 2000s as a regular member. Around 2003, he's elected chapter president and then re-elected year after year, holding that position right up until his arrest in 2016. Earl Fisher serves as national secretary for a period and also as the Portland chapter's vice president. There's also support clubs, which are smaller clubs that back the Gypsy Jokers and pay some portion of their dues to the Gypsy Jokers. In Portland, one of those support clubs is the Road Brothers. In order to be a member of the Gypsy Jokers, you have to be invited to Prospect, which is the kind of probation period where you prove yourself and put up with hazing. Once a man is accepted into the club, he's considered patched in. Once you're patched in, you're allowed to wear the Gypsy Joker three-piece patch on the back of your leather vest or your cut, and you're treated as a full brother in the club. The three-piece patch consists of a top rocker that says Gypsy Joker, a middle patch with a court jester character named Simon, and a bottom rocker that says USA. The club has bylaws, and members are expected to pay dues, show up to weekly meetings called church, and ride in club motorcycle runs. In the Portland clubhouse, the door leading down to the basement where church is held every Friday night has a sign taped to it that reads, "No cell phones downstairs." Inside that same clubhouse, investigators later find photos and items printed with neon SS bolt symbols, including on merchandise the club sold. When he's asked about it, Mark tries to downplay the meaning, saying the symbols came from one member whose nickname was Nazi. Everyone in the club understands that if you break club rules, you could be disciplined, and leaving the club is just as important as joining it. If a member leaves on decent terms, he's considered out good, but if he violates club rules, he's labeled out bad, and being out bad can put a target on your back. In court later, some Gypsy Jokers and associates admit that some members are involved in crime. Some use and sell drugs, some steal motorcycles, some enforce discipline with their fists and assault people. For example, in Kennewick, Washington, Kenneth was accused of knocking out a man's teeth because he showed up late to a motorcycle run, then having another member tattoo a large X over the Gypsy Joker patch tattoo on the man's back. Chad Leroy Ericson was born in 1970 and grew up just outside Portland, Oregon. He was raised mostly by his mom, a former United States Army nurse and Vietnam War combat veteran. In the summer of 1989, right before his senior year of high school, while everyone else was thinking about graduation and prom, Chad enlisted in the Army National Guard, and he spent that summer at basic training. Chad stayed in the National Guard for more than 22 years. By the time he was done, he earned an honorable discharge in December 2011 at the rank of Staff Sergeant. His performance reviews were full of praise, describing his sterling personal and professional conduct, noting that he takes the hard right instead of easy wrong, and that he displays courage, conviction, and professionalism daily. When he wasn't in uniform, Chad worked in heating and cooling from the end of high school all the way up through his deployment. From August 16, 2004 to February 8, 2006, Chad was called to active duty and deployed to Iraq. He was stationed at Balad Air Base. Soldiers called it Mortaradeville because of how often it got hit with mortar fire. On one mission, the Humvee he was riding in was struck by an improvised explosive device. Chad survived, but that blast later became one of the contributing factors to a diagnosis of traumatic brain injury. Before Iraq, his life was stable. He had no arrest, had never needed mental health treatment, and was doing well in both his military and civilian work. After he came back to the United States in early 2006, things changed. He said his life was in shambles. He didn't have a place to live, and his service-related injuries meant he couldn't go back to his job in heating and air conditioning. To get by, Chad started working as a bouncer at local bars and strip clubs. At the same time, he turned to heavy drinking to avoid thinking about what he had seen in Iraq and other traumas from his past. The same year he came back, he picked up a drunk driving charge that ended in a diversion program. A clinical psychologist eventually diagnosed him with service-connected, combat-related PTSD. Chad first met members of the Gypsy Joker Motorcycle Club in 2012, about a year after his honorable discharge. At that point, he didn't know much about the club. What he did recognize was the feeling, the camaraderie, the structure, the sense of belonging he used to have in the military and had been missing ever since he left. The Gypsy Jokers filled that need. That same year, Chad picked up a misdemeanor firearm possession case. In 2013, he missed court on that case and was charged with failure to appear. For that firearm offense, he ended up being locked up for 11 days, the longest sentence he'd ever done up to that point. Also in 2013, Chad began prospecting for the Gypsy Jokers. On September 1st, 2014, during an organized Labor Day motorcycle run, he was officially patched in as a full member of the Gypsy Jokers Portland chapter. While Chad is working his way into the Gypsy Jokers, another man is on his way out. Robert Bagger Huggins is a member of the Portland chapter of the GJMC. He has serious meth and heroin issues, and by 2014, Robert has stolen thousands of dollars from the Portland clubhouse. According to witnesses, Portland Gypsy Jokers, including Mark, beat Robert as punishment. Mark denies ever assaulting him, but either way, Mark and the others force Robert to sign over the title to his motorcycle to make up for the money he stole. After that, Robert is kicked out and labeled out bad. That means he's in bad standing and is supposed to stay away from the Gypsy Jokers and the clubhouse, but he doesn't. On June 5th, 2015, everything escalates. Mark is at work when his phone rings. On the line is a FedEx driver. He tells Mark he's at his house with Nicole Stevens, Mark's girlfriend, and something is very wrong. Men have broken into the house, zip-tied Nicole's hands, and ransacked the place. The driver explains he found Nicole like that while delivering a package. Nicole tells him she recognized one of the men who tied her up, Robert Huggins. Mark tells the driver to cut the zip ties and put Nicole on the phone. When she gets on the line, she repeats the same story. Robert was one of the men who broke into the house, zip-tied her, and robbed them at gunpoint. As soon as Mark hears that, he heads home. There's a problem, though. Nicole has a history of opioid addiction, and in the past, she has stolen from Mark because of it. Even as he listens to her, Mark isn't sure how much of her story he should believe. Still, whether or not he completely trusts Nicole's story, the damage is done. Word spreads that a former Gypsy Joker who went out bad has now invaded the chapter president's home, tied up his girlfriend, and robbed him. In the days and weeks after the home invasion, the Gypsy Jokers start actively hunting for Robert. Mark is furious and wants answers. He turns to his vice president, Earl Fisher, and tells him to put the word out that the club is looking for Robert. Earl tells other Gypsy Jokers, support club members, and even non-biker associates to spread the message. At least at the start, the goal isn't officially to kill him. Mark wants to talk to Robert and find out if he really took part in the home invasion, who else was involved, and whether Nicole might have been part of it, given her history of stealing from him. By mid-June 2015, Earl gets word that Robert might be staying at a drug house in Southeast Portland. So Mark, Earl, Ryan Negrinelli, Ian Jung, and Ray Rockefeller drive over there. At that point, Ryan is a Gypsy Joker prospect, while Ian and Ray are hang-arounds. Mark shows up carrying a baseball bat, and Ryan and Ray are armed with guns. They force their way into the house, assault and tie up the people inside, and start demanding to know where Robert is. Even though Robert isn't there, they do find some of the things that were stolen from Mark's home during the June 5th robbery. On June 18th, 2015, Tyler Pribernow gets out of jail. Tyler is a member of the Road Brothers, a support club for the Gypsy Jokers. Earl brings him up to speed on what's been happening and tells him about the search for Robert. Nobody sits Tyler down and says we're going to kill him, but Tyler later says that to him, it was obvious where this was headed. In Tyler's own words, Robert was a dead man walking. Earl later agrees that once Mark's stolen property was found at that drug house, the idea of just talking to Robert faded away. The plan is to go get him and at the very least beat him badly. On June 30th, 2015, Tyler hears that Robert is at a house near Northeast Holiday Street in Portland. As soon as he gets the tip, he calls Earl and Mark. They tell him to go get eyes on Bagger. In other words, go over there, make sure it's really Robert, but don't move on him yet. Tyler drives out to the area, parks on a dead-end side street, and watches. From where he is, he can see Robert sitting in the driveway in a Ford Expedition. While Tyler is keeping watch, Mark, Ryan, Ray, and Ian borrow a Suburban and head to the Holiday Street address to get him. A residential surveillance camera on a nearby house records what happens next. Just before 11 p.m., the Suburban pulls into the driveway facing Robert's Expedition. 5 men, including Tyler, jump out, rush the Expedition, yank the driver's door open, and start dragging Robert out of the driver's seat, trying to force him into the Suburban. Robert doesn't go quietly. Tyler describes getting him out of the car as quite a struggle. He uses his flashlight to smash Robert's hands so the others could pry his fingers off the steering wheel. When Robert still wouldn't let go, Mark swings a baseball bat into his leg. Neighbors hear Robert screaming for help and call 911, but by the time Portland police arrive, the driveway is empty. The Suburban and everyone inside it is already gone. While the kidnapping on Northeast Holiday is happening in Portland, Chad is in Longview, Washington, also looking for Robert. That day, Chad asks GJMC member Joseph Folkerts for a ride. Chad doesn't tell him why he needs a ride, but he does give Joseph a warning saying, "You may not want to get involved in this." They drive to a house in Longview where Robert used to stay. They look around, and when they see that Robert's truck isn't there, they leave. During the car ride, Chad's phone starts ringing. He gets calls from Earl and Tyler. Earl later says he called Chad and asked him to meet at the RICO station near the Woodland exit off I-5, specifically so Chad could help show Mark how to get to a rural property owned by former Gypsy Joker Darwin Dagwood Hicks. Tyler remembers his own call with Chad the same. Chad then tells him to head to the RICO gas station. After kidnapping Robert, the Suburban heads north from Portland toward Woodland. Mark is driving. Ian is in the front passenger seat. In the back, Robert is on the floorboard between Ray and Ryan. Ray is holding Robert at gunpoint while Ryan keeps hitting him as they drive. The Suburban then pulls into the RICO gas station. One by one, 3 more cars roll in. Earl and another Gypsy Joker, Ron Meyer, in a white PT Cruiser, Tyler in a maroon PT Cruiser, and Joseph and Chad in Joseph's black Chevy Tahoe. When the small convoy leaves the gas station and heads toward Dagwood's property, Joseph makes a wrong turn. He misses the turn and has to double back, and because of that, Joseph and Chad arrive at Dagwood's after everyone else. When the Suburban arrives at Dagwood's, Robert is dragged out of the car and into a shed on the property. Robert is already in brutal shape. According to Tyler, his nose is smashed, his teeth have poked through his lips, and his leg is so damaged he can't walk on his own. Tyler described him as looking mangled. On top of that, Robert did a big shot of heroin before they grabbed him, so he's high as fuck. Inside that shed, Gypsy Jokers, Road Brothers and Associates take turns brutalizing Robert while Mark watches and directs what's happening. Robert is zip-tied to a chair, and the witnesses describe what happens into 2 phases. In the first phase, multiple people take turns beating Robert while demanding answers about the robbery at Mark's house. Robert is barely there. He's slurring, speaking mostly gibberish, eyes closed and not giving them anything useful. When the beating doesn't get them what they want, Tyler takes over and pushes things into what he calls a second interrogation phase. He tells Mark that if they really want answers, they need to focus on pain, not just random punches. They need to twist, poke, and go after sensitive spots. From there, Tyler starts improvising different ways to torture Robert for information, like squeezing Robert's nipples with pliers, then cutting them off, heating baling wire and using it to burn through the steel toe of Robert's boots, driving a nail through one of his boots into his foot, and using a garden tool called a garden weasel to twist and tear the skin on Robert's stomach. Tyler admits that he and Ryan waterboarded Robert. Ryan also claims that Chad laughed and helped get more water during the waterboarding. During this hours-long torture session, Tyler also claims that Chad used an extremely sharp hook knife to carve an X over a tattoo on Robert's chest. while Tyler himself admits that he used hot baling wire on Robert's nipples. Ryan says that when Robert is later moved and placed somewhere else, Chad cut zip ties off Robert and then accidentally stabs him in the thigh, saying, "Whoops." But Tyler contradicts that part and testifies that it was actually Ian who stabbed Robert in the leg with a buck knife. Even after all of that, Robert still doesn't give them any information. Eventually, Robert is dragged back out of the shed. Tyler says that at Mark's direction, he swings a baseball bat twice into the back of Robert's head, like a golf chip shot. Those hits turned out to be fatal. Ryan says that after the second extremely hard swing, Mark snapped at Tyler, saying something like, "What the fuck? If he dies, this becomes a federal case." After that, Robert is loaded into Joseph's SUV, driven to a field in Richfield, Washington, and dumped there. Some of the Gypsy Jokers would later claim that Robert was still breathing when they put him in the SUV, and that the idea is to leave him somewhere he might be found and taken to a hospital. Early the next morning on July 1st, a logger named Brandon Hanker is out working in a field in Richfield. Around 5:20 a.m., he sees an SUV pull into the field, stop for a moment, and then drive away. When he and a coworker go to check the area, they find Robert's body lying in the grass where the SUV stopped. His injuries are horrific. Robert has a broken leg, skull fractures, stab wounds, and deep bruises and cuts all over his body. His hands are smashed. One of his fingernails has been ripped out and his nipples have been cut off. He also still has zip ties on his left hand. The medical examiner later rules that Robert's cause of death is multiple blunt and sharp force injuries to different parts of his body. In other words, he was beaten and tortured to death. Once detectives figure out who Robert is, it doesn't take long for their focus to turn straight to the Gypsy Jokers. The same day Robert's body is found, Mark calls a meeting with everyone who was at Dagwood's the night before. According to the cooperating witnesses, once they're all together, Mark tells them that Robert didn't make it, and he asks Tyler why he hit Robert so hard. He also gives them instructions. If anyone gets arrested, they should ask for a lawyer right away, and most importantly, he tells them to keep their mouths shut about what happened. He even gives them tips on how to pass a lie detector test. Mark, on the other hand, later claims that he only called the meeting to talk about an upcoming summer run scheduled for July 4th, not to organize a cover-up or discuss Robert's death. However, while they're both in jail waiting for trial, Mark writes a note to Earl Fisher. In it, he says, "If we're both hoping to be in a situation where we can testify in front of the jury, our testimony needs to be similar. I don't remember can work in a lot of cases where there's doubt. Let's beat this and go home. Loyalty forever, 710. The numbers 7 and 10 stand for the letters G and J in the alphabet, shorthand for Gypsy Joker. In 2016, a Multnomah County grand jury indicts Mark Dinklow, Earl Fisher, and Tyler Pribenow for Robert's kidnapping and murder. At the same time, federal agents start looking beyond just this one killing. They start investigating the Gypsy Joker Motorcycle Club as a potential racketeering enterprise. That racketeering investigation lasted for years. By 2018, a federal grand jury in the District of Oregon indicts Mark, Earl, and Tyler on federal charges of vicar murder, kidnapping resulting in death, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping resulting in death. Those vicar counts are death penalty eligible, and even if the government doesn't seek the death penalty, a conviction still means a mandatory life sentence. Once the federal case is officially underway, the state charges are dropped at the request of state prosecutors. By November 2018, the feds file a superseding indictment and add more defendants in a brand new charge, RICO conspiracy. The superseding indictment now lists the original 3, plus Ryan Negrinelli, Chad Ericson, and Joseph Folkerts. They are all hit with RICO conspiracy charges, along with 4 separate counts tied directly to Robert's kidnapping and murder. The national president of the Gypsy Jokers, Kenneth House, is added too, but only on the RICO conspiracy count. Later on, Ian Jung and Ray Rockefeller are also added to the case, but only on the RICO conspiracy count. In that superseding indictment, prosecutors paint the Gypsy Jokers as a racketeering organization, not just a social motorcycle club. They lay out the club's structure and argue that the purpose of the enterprise is to preserve, promote, and protect its power, territory, and profits through intimidation, threats, beatings, witness tampering, retaliation, kidnapping, and murder. According to the government, when members and associates commit acts of violence, they're not just enforcing rules, they're increasing their status and position inside the GJMC. To support that theory, the superseding indictment lists 74 separate overt acts that prosecutors say were carried out in furtherance of the conspiracy, stretching from 2003 all the way to 2018, everything from assaults, drug deals, and stolen motorcycles to the torture and murder of Robert Bagger Huggins. Out of everyone charged in the case, 6 men decide early on that they don't want to roll the dice at trial on murder and kidnapping charges that could put them away for life. Earl Fisher, Tyler Pribernau, Ryan Negrinelli, Joseph Folkerts, Ian Jung, and Ray Rockefeller all agreed to cooperate with the government. In return, prosecutors let them plead guilty to a single count of RICO conspiracy, dropped the rest of the charges, and promised them lighter sentences. 59-year-old Mark Dinklau, 64-year-old Kenneth House, and 51-year-old Chad Ericson choose to fight the case in front of a jury. The government decides not to seek the death penalty, but if Mark or Chad are convicted on the major counts, they still face mandatory life sentences. The jury trial kicks off in late 2021, about 5 years after Robert's murder, and runs for about 5 to 6 weeks. Roughly 70 witnesses take the stand. The jurors don't just hear about the night Robert Bagger Huggins was kidnapped, tortured, and killed. The government walks them through years of Gypsy Joker history, bar fights, stolen motorcycles, drug dealing on runs, violent assaults and intimidation, including incidents involving people who aren't even on trial in this case. They hear about things like a 2003 altercation in Lebanon, Oregon, where several Gypsy Jokers, none of whom are defendants, take a red Camaro from a man's driveway and hit him in the head during a struggle for the keys. Police say the bikers actually cooperated when confronted and even showed paperwork claiming they owned the car. The case goes to trial on assault charges, and those defendants are ultimately acquitted. When it comes to Robert's murder, the cooperators admit they helped kidnap and kill Robert, but they point the finger straight at Mark. They tell the jury that Mark orchestrated everything as payback for Robert breaking into his house and robbing him. Mark takes the stand in his own defense and denies planning the kidnapping and ordering the torture, and denies having anything to do with Robert's murder at all. He says the last time he saw Robert was back in 2014, when Robert was kicked out of the club as out bad. Mark's defense team leans hard on that. They argue that Earl, as the Portland chapter vice president, took it on himself to go after Robert, and later dragged Mark into the story to shift blame away from himself. According to Mark, he was at strip clubs in Southeast Portland when everything went down. He says he turned his phone off because Nicole was blowing him up with text during an argument, and he didn't want to deal with it until later. From the very start, Chad admits that he was at Dagwood's property when Robert was tortured, but his defense is that he didn't help kidnap, beat, or torture him. Chad's position is that he got pulled into something he didn't fully understand until it was too late, and that once he arrived at Dagwood's, he was basically just there in the background, more of an onlooker than a participant. Out of everyone who testifies, only Earl and Ian say that he didn't take part in hurting Robert. Earl also points out that Chad isn't known as an enforcer in the Gypsy Jokers. He describes Chad as kind of goofy and says he's never heard of Chad giving anyone an eye dotting, club slang for punching someone hard enough to leave them with a black eye. After Tyler is arrested, he finds out that his girlfriend, Rachel Smuin, had also been in a relationship with Chad at the same time. On the stand, Tyler tells the jury it didn't really bother him and that he wasn't jealous. But in a recorded jail phone call, he angrily threatens to break someone's neck if Rachel is seeing someone else. He also makes it clear he doesn't like Chad at all, calling him not the sharpest tool in the shed and a dumbass in all senses of the word. So maybe Tyler had a reason to lie about Chad's role in the torture and murder. After weeks of testimony and several days of deliberations, the jury finally reaches its decisions. For Kenneth "The Wiz" House, the national president of the Gypsy Jokers, the jury finds him not guilty of the RICO conspiracy, the only charge he's facing. The jury finds Chad Ericson not guilty of the RICO conspiracy in count 1. The jury still finds Chad guilty on all 4 counts tied directly to Robert's kidnapping and murder. Murder in aid of racketeering, kidnapping in aid of racketeering, interstate kidnapping resulting in death, and conspiracy to commit interstate kidnapping. For Mark Dinklau, the longtime Portland chapter president, the jury finds him guilty on every single count he's charged with. Both Mark and Chad are sentenced to mandatory life sentences. The cooperators walk away with much lighter sentences. Joseph Folkerts is sentenced to 4 years in prison. Ray Rockefeller is sentenced to 65 months, just over 5 years. Ryan Negrinelli is sentenced to 7.5 years. Ian Jung is sentenced to 100 months, a little over 8 years. And Earl Fisher is sentenced to 15 years. Tyler Pribernow, the main torturer, the one who personally delivered the fatal baseball bat blows, is sentenced to 140 months, just under 12 years. By 2020, while Gypsy Joker members were still sitting in Multnomah County's downtown jail, waiting on their federal murder and racketeering cases, the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office quietly opens an internal investigation into allegations that some jail deputies are doing favors for gang members, including both the Gypsy Jokers and the Hoovers. A detective named Chris Stevens drafts what becomes known as the Stevens Memo 2020. A lot of what Chris records in that memo comes from proffer interviews. At some point before Chris's investigation, 2 Gypsy Jokers in this case and a 3rd inmate in another case talk to federal prosecutor Leah Bolstad. They tell her that some deputies are allowing unrecorded private phone calls for Gypsy Joker inmates, and deputies are passing notes between cells despite no contact orders, so inmates can get their story straight before trial. Thank you for watching.